Hi, it's Gordon. I'm not here to talk about my book. I'm here to talk about some thoughts of mine about what Jehovah's Witnesses say to you when they come to your door, and about what you could actually say back to them, in terms of arguments. And it was because I was talking the other day with some Mormons, and they were telling me some weird stuff, and all the arguments I came back to them with were very logical and really talked about the kind of the idea of the Bible and their Bible and how it is that they think they've got the monopoly on God and why their beliefs are only limited to them, etc., etc. But all they kept saying was, you've just got to believe and you've got to ask God and He'll guide you. And I thought, well, that's a lot of bollocks, isn't it? They'd been brought up as Mormons. Anyway, so I've been thinking about some of the things that the witnesses say, and when I was a witness, it was always, have you ever wondered why there's so much badness in the world? And it was always about the signs of the times, those famous scriptures, but know this, in the last days, critical times, hard to deal with, will be here. Men will be lovers of themselves rather than lovers of God. There'll be earthquakes and wars and reports of wars. Immorality. Men who lie with men. Men who lie with beasts. That's zoophilia, I think. And so they ladle this on, and they use all of these terms to describe what we see in the last days. How we know that we are in the last days, yeah? And that's kind of the leverage that they use. So I've been thinking about it, and I thought, well, okay, let's start with the beginning. So imagine I'm talking to a witness now. So, you believe in the Bible, don't you? Yes, it's your Bible, even your Bible, yeah. Okay, and so you believe that when we see these things like wars and reports of wars and earthquakes and people being lovers of themselves rather than lovers of God, when you see all of that, then you know that you're in the last days. Is that right? You know that the end's coming. Okay, so you believe in the story of Adam and Eve, the sort of the creation story in the Bible. The very first couple that were brought onto the earth by God. You believe that, don't you? It's in your Bible, isn't it? So I want you just to sort of just roll with me on this and think about this. Today, there's not a lot of faith on the earth. I think the stats show that 73% of people are atheists, don't believe in God. And you know why? Because you can't see him, and because he doesn't do anything on earth that we can see. If you know what I mean, he doesn't do anything like you would expect a God to do, like control stuff or stop badness and things like that. So no wonder people don't believe in him, because to believe in him you've got to have faith, as George Michael said, and we don't see him. But imagine this. Imagine if one day the skies opened and there appeared God in all of his splendour, big long beard, like the Old Testament God, finger waving, going, you must do this and you must do that, and strokey beard. And if he came, I think, and I don't know whether you agree with me, I think that the majority of people would believe in him. Yeah, because there he is, up in the sky, going, just like as you would expect God to do. And so I think that if he appeared and told us what we had to do, actually told us from his own mouth what we had to do, we'd probably do it. The majority of us would, I think, wouldn't we? Because it would be proven then God does exist. So let's go back to Adam and Eve. Now, Adam and Eve were perfect, and because of that, they had the pleasure of speaking directly to God. So you can imagine, they actually had direct communication with God. God used to come to the garden on an afternoon after they'd had a morning of naming the animals and probably a little bit of sex or whatever. Afternoon, after the siesta, God used to come down and have a chat with them and tell them. He used to say things like, You must name all the animals, be fruitful, fill the earth. Don't touch the bloody tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't touch it. The tree of life, we'll just leave that for the moment because we don't know what we're doing with that. That's why I don't talk about it, but we'll talk about that later on. Things he used to talk to them directly. And even though he talked to them directly, they had a relationship with God, even though they misbehaved. They did exactly the opposite of what he asked them to do. He said, don't eat that fruit, and they ate the fruit. So how? I think they must have loved themselves more than they loved God, don't you think? They must have. They were lovers of themselves. They loved their opinion more than they loved God's. Disrespectful, haughty. So that's a sign of the end, isn't it? You know, men being lovers of themselves. This was the first couple, and they were lovers of themselves and haughty and naughty. So that means at the end, if these signs tell you that the end's coming, the end was coming right at the beginning. And then what was the other one? Oh yeah, violence and you know, men being very violent. We're very violent today, aren't we? There's a lot of wars going on and things like that. Very violent. But do you know the second generation? You know the story. I know you believe it as well because it's in your Bible. Cain killed Abel. Okay, why? Well, Abel used to rear sheep, and I don't mean that in the sexual way. Cain reared sheep. It was an animal farmer. Or should I say Abel? Cain was just a farmer. He used to just grow bog standard stuff, you know, like the vegetable stuff. And both of them were giving sacrifices up to God. And well, the sacrifice of a lamb, it was lovely, blood everywhere, and you know, the smell was pleasant to the nostrils of God. Whereas Cain, all he could put on his sacrifice, his altar, was like, you know, a couple of corn on the cob, a little bit of, you know, some lettuce and a cabbage. And it just wasn't the same. And he threw himself into a fury. He became so furious that he smote his brother. His brother was smitten he was, with a rock. And that was just because he was jealous over a sacrifice to God. Okay? Now, that seems to me to be very, very violent, doesn't it? You know, and that's kind of, you know, I don't go around killing people, do you? And I think most people that I know don't do things like, you know, you wouldn't just think about picking up a rock and smashing your brother's head open, would you? Really? I mean, you know, I'd like to smack his backside a few times, but I wouldn't smash his head open with a rock. So, men being violent, well, if that's a sign of the end, you know, the sign of the times, second generation, the end was coming then. The end was coming before we'd even started. And then, isn't that funny? Then we've got like wars and reports of wars. Yeah, we've got wars today. Absolutely. Wars everywhere. And then you read the Old Testament. And hang on a minute. It's up to here with wars. If you want bloodshed, read the Old Testament. Up to here with blood. Scripture says, and the blood was up to the bridles of the horses. That's a lot of bloody blood. That's a lot of blood. In the Old Testament. Wars, well, there were a lot of wars. Absolutely. Wars everywhere. God's wars, interestingly enough, they were the wars that were caused by God. He was the war man, the warmonger. And so if you're looking for like signs of the end, these wars and reports of wars, Old Testament. The end was coming then. Yeah. The end was coming then. And obviously there were God's wars. God did like a little bit of bloodshed. I mean, you know, he says that the blood is mine, and obviously he was trying to get all of it from everybody. That wasn't on his side. So alright, so wars and reports of wars as well. That was happening a long time ago. So maybe the end was coming then. And then of course we've got sexual immorality. Okay. Porneia. Now, I'm not going to disagree with you. Today we've got a lot of sexual immorality. People are just having sex willy-nilly. Willy-nilly. And if it's a sign of the times, sign of the end coming, well, let's have a look at the Old Testament again. A lot of sexual activity going on in the Old Testament. Sodom and Gomorrah. That's that, that expression, sodomy, that's where it comes from. Men lying with men. And men lying with beasts. It was in the Bible then. Why? Because that's what was going on. Yes, I mean, people would say, yes, I lived in, I'm from Sodom, born and reared. And so lots of sexual activity. Lot, for example, he went out of Sodom and Gomorrah with his family. His wife turned to a pillar of salt, all right, because she was a little bit nosy, couldn't stop turning around, never looked back. That's it's an expression that we need to never look back. Well, she looked back, and then what happened was Lot didn't have a wife. Big problems, because he had to carry on the line of God's line all the way down to David and Solomon and everything. And if Lot didn't have a child, the temple wouldn't get built. So what did he do? Well, his daughters, actually, they were the clever ones. They got him drunk and shagged him. Okay, so it was kind of like incestuous rape. Bottom line, I suppose. And they both got pregnant, and there you are, Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. The line continued, with an incestuous line, but the line continued. And God favoured Lot. Lot was one of God's favourites, okay? And his daughters, I suppose. Well, he didn't order that the kids be killed because of incestuous. Of course, Lot could have also just got married again. That would have been easier, wouldn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so sex was going on in those days. There was a lot of sex going on, like outside of marriage. I believe David. Now, David, just combining wars and reports of wars and sex. David was God's favourite king. God, Jehovah, loved David because David did everything he wanted, and when he said just kill all of those people, he killed them. Yeah, he didn't ask about it, he just killed them, and he was very good. He was a really, really good killer, and so Jehovah liked him. But he'd shed a lot of bloodshed. He'd had too much blood on his hands, and so Jehovah didn't want him to build the temple because too much blood on his hands, you see. Now, David did have an affair with a lady called Bathsheba. He shagged her. But that wasn't the problem. You see, the shagging bit, I think, was alright. It was the bloodshed that God didn't like. And you know that that's the case because when you think about it, Solomon, wise old Solomon, he was the one who nearly split the baby in half with a sword. Just to prove a point, obviously. Well, wise old Solomon, he had a rather large amount of concubines. I can't remember how many, but I think there were more than 100. I think there might be a lot more than 100. So Solomon had a concubine. Now, I don't know if you know what a concubine is. It sounds like a fruit, doesn't it? Like a hard fruit. But it's what's called, we know today as a booty call. Yeah? These are these women who are just on standby, and when you want to have a shag, you just pick up, obviously it wouldn't be the mobile phone, maybe a bit of papyrus or whatever, and you would just say, bring me number 33, please. It's like ordering off a Chinese menu. Bring me number 44, 69 sometimes. Bring them in, and then he would shag them, and then he would send them off again. Okay, that was his concubines. So shagging outside of marriage didn't seem to be a major problem because Solomon built the temple and had God's blessing. And from those two pillars in the temple, masonry was developed. Okay. And so, sex, if we're looking for sex as a sign of the end of the times, well, the end of the times was coming in the Old Testament, wasn't it? I think so. So, I'm just puzzled, you see, or I was puzzled as to why it is that Jehovah's Witnesses think it's just today that these signs of the times are happening, and it's not earlier. For example, earthquakes. You know that the earth was formed through volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. The earth was formed that way. We've had a number of them. They've been happening all the time. They've been happening before mankind was on the earth. So the end was coming before even man got here, you know, if we're going to take that as a sign. And then, yeah, so what is it about now? Why is it now that they're talking about these signs and everything like that? Well, I did a little bit of investigation into the Jehovah's Witness religion, you know, the beginnings of it. And the thing is, like all religions, it's had a bit of a dodgy beginning. It had a little bit of an embarrassing start, and that's okay. All religions seem to have a little bit of an embarrassing start. You know, the Catholics started by selling entries into heaven, like a little ticket. You get in to the rich people. You know, you've been bad, you've been a bastard all your life. However, you are now forgiven, and you may get in £3,000, please. The Catholic Church started like that. The Church of England started because Henry wanted to divorce his wife, and he ended up killing them all, didn't he, or killing a lot of them, and he just didn't want to be part of the Catholic Church, so he just, you know, he basically started his church so he could have a shag. So that was a good way of starting the church. And then the Mormons, well, they're very embarrassing starts, you know. They're like translating the Book of Mormon by sticking your head in a hat with some seeing stones, and weird stuff goes on. Well, the Witnesses haven't really had such a good start either, and it's because I was looking at it, and you know, I know you know this because this is your religion. I know you know your history of your religion. But a man called Charles Taze Russell, he in the 1800s, the back end of the 1800s, he was looking at the Seventh-day Adventists, and the Seventh-day Adventists were great sort of doomsayers. They were saying the end of the world was coming, but they were getting lots and lots of interest. You know, people were interested in that kind of thing, and he thought, hang on a minute, I can see a business opportunity here. And he knew that they were wrong, because the Seventh-day Adventists had said the end was coming, and it hadn't come. And so he said, I can do better than that. So he got out his Bible and he made some calculations, okay, just rough ones on the back of a fag packet, I think, and he came up with the date 1878, I think it was. Let me just get it. Just got a few dates written down here as well, yeah, just, okay. So, Charles, he was known as Pastor Russell, yeah, 1875, that was his first date, it was his first stab. Look, you know, let's forgive him for that. He made a first stab, it didn't happen, okay. But, you know, you can't blame him for trying, can you? You know, he put in his best efforts, but then he learned from his mistake. He knew, he said, yeah, you see, obviously I'd made my calculations wrong, I'll do it again. And so, he went just to verify that the next date was going to be right. He went to Egypt, and he went to the Great Pyramid in Giza, and he went into the passage, you know, the passage that leads to the king's area, and he measured it with a metal rule, actually, and using the measurements, a day for a year, as they do, using the measurements, he came up with the date 1914 as the end of the world. And what he said, and you know, just as an aside, it's interesting, isn't it, that the founder of the Jehovah's Witness faith was what you call a pyramidologist. That's somebody who believed that the pyramids were here as a message from God, and that we used them as a prophecy. And it's interesting that today, if you were a pyramidologist as a Jehovah's Witness, you would be disfellowshipped. And it's just another interesting thing as well. He was a Mason, a Freemason, part of that group as well, believed in the higher power and all of that, and pyramids and everything. And it's interesting that if you were a Jehovah's Witness today and a Mason, you would be thrown out. You would be disfellowshipped, because you're not allowed to be a Mason, and you're not allowed to be a pyramidologist. So isn't it bizarre that the man who actually started the faith would have been disfellowshipped if he was alive today? But never mind. So he came up with 1914 based on his measurements of the pyramid, and he put these measurements in the watchtower, yeah, because the watchtower existed then. That was his kind of his little leaflet that he put out. Well, 1914 came, and you can imagine his glee. Absolute glee when the World War started, you know, and then didn't happen. It didn't happen. And yeah, there were some wars and it was pretty horrific, but end of the world? No. So then he had another go. And he said 1915. No, 1915. Not 1914. Got it wrong. A couple of inches out in the pyramid. As it happened, he was a lot of inches out when we found out, when they measured it later on with the laser beam, but it doesn't matter. 1915. All right. Made an error in the calculations. 1915. So 1915 came and went. And so, not to be deterred, I mean, you've got to give the guy credit for his persistence. Then he said 1918. No, sorry, but just hang on there. Just don't hold your breath, because that's 3 years. That's a long time to hold your breath. But just be patient. 1918. So obviously 1918 came, and actually, as it happened, the war ended then. And so, do you know? By that point, he had some egg on his face. There were, he could have made a small omelette with the egg that he had on his face, but he still persisted, and he said, "No, 1920. Okay, another couple of years. It's just bedding in. All right, it's just settling in. Jesus is just, he's getting his sword polished or whatever." Well, 1920 came and went, and then so again he said, "Well, what about 1925?" I think he was just, he's pulling these out like the lottery balls. 1925. What about that one? Let's go for that. 5 years time, I could be dead. Okay. Didn't happen. And then, there was another guy who came after Pastor Russell, and he was called Judge Rutherford. Now he was the businessman of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I know you know this because I know you know your history, and he was the one who started the preaching work, and he really got things fired up. And he liked the idea of giving an end date to the world as well. And so, interestingly enough, I don't know if you know that, but it's kind of documented that the judge, Judge Rutherford, he was an alcoholic. He had a problem with alcohol. We didn't have a problem with alcohol. He had plenty of it. He didn't have a problem getting it anyway. Even during the time when in America, I can't remember what it was called now, when they banned alcohol, and he was furious. He was furious, and he used to get alcohol smuggled into him as well during those temperance days. I can't remember what it was called now, but yeah, he used to. And there's sort of documented stories of his aides. The people who would help him would have to lift him into his cars and lift him out because he was so drunk. And it's interesting, isn't it, that if you were drunk today as a Jehovah's Witness, you would be disfellowshipped. So isn't it funny that the two men who instigated the whole religion would have been disfellowshipped if they'd been in the religion today? It's bizarre, isn't it? It shows you how much the religions move forward, isn't it? Forget the roots. I mean, the roots aren't everything. The roots of a tree don't mean the whole tree, do they? Well, but they're part of it, aren't they? But it doesn't mean just because the religion had a really bad, embarrassing start that it should be embarrassed today. No, of course not. So then we came next day, 1941. 1941 was going to be the biggie. It was going to happen. End of the world. And it didn't happen. So that was that. And then finally, the best one, 1975. 1975. I lived through it, and lots of people did weird things in 1975. Lots of witnesses did weird things. Some witnesses sold the houses and became pioneers and spent all of the money because they knew that they weren't going to need it. And on the other side, some witnesses took out massive bank loans and big mortgages and things like that, and because they knew they were never going to have to pay them off. And then 1976 came, and they were in big trouble. So so that was a bit embarrassing. Now, from that point, the witnesses have never given another date. They do say that the end's coming very, 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 very soon. That's what they say, but they haven't put a date on it. In fact, just to finish off, and the interesting thing was, this 1914 date, which actually came from the measurements of the pyramid. Well, they used that as the key date to show that that was Jesus' second coming. Jesus had come. He'd come once, enjoyed it, and then he was coming again. and they said that 1914 was his second coming, but the date was actually the date that he gotten from the pyramid rather than from the Bible. And then through some clever manipulation of Bible figures, they managed to somehow, thank God, somebody must have been so relieved, thank God I've managed to tie some figures in the Bible up with 1914. Everybody was really happy. And so they used 1914 as the day. They've used it like for the whole of the 20th century as for the day that the end would start. You know, those last days. And then they used to say, well, that generation would by no means pass away. The generation that saw 1914 would by no means pass away before the end. And of course, you know, the year 2000 was coming up. Things were getting a little bit sticky for them, because it was obvious that the people who saw 1914 were our bastards, and they were all dropping down dead. And so it was around about that time that somebody said, well, look, well, why don't we just say that it's not that generation specifically, but kind of like a generalized generation, you know, like a you know, the generation that saw the whole century. So that was good. So they managed to get themselves out of that little spot, even changing a little bit in the Awake, where it used to say the generation will by no means pass away, and they say they've changed it now to say the end's coming really, really, really soon, but don't hold your breath because you might choke. Okay, something like that. And so, you know, the end was coming since the beginning, since before the beginning. And so all the signs that we see today have always been there, ever since the very, very, very beginning. So why we should think that the end is just coming now, based on the Bible, well, we shouldn't. And so, who knows? Maybe the end is coming, I don't know. But if it comes, it won't have anything to do with the Jehovah's Witnesses. Because basically, their arguments have got so many holes in them, they look like a bit of Swiss cheese. So anyway, thank you very much for your time. There's 27 minutes of chatting. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll speak to you later. Look forward to your comments. Bye.